When my brother Marcus announced his wedding date, the silence in our family group chat was deafening. August 15th, the exact same day I had been planning my wedding for over a year. My hands trembled as I stared at my phone, reading his message again and again, hoping I had misunderstood. But there it was, clear as day. My golden boy brother had deliberately chosen to sabotage the most important day of my life. What happened next would expose decades of family lies, financial fraud, and favoritism that ran deeper than I ever imagined. By the time the dust settled, our entire family would be destroyed, and Marcus would lose everything he had stolen from me. Before we dive into this family revenge story that will leave you speechless, let me know in the comments where you are watching from around the world. Hit that like button if you have ever dealt with a narcissistic family member, and subscribe, because trust me, you will want to see how this golden child finally got what he deserved. The betrayal runs deeper than you could ever imagine. My name is Seraphina, and I have spent my entire 28 years living in the shadow of my younger brother Marcus. From the moment he was born, our parents made it crystal clear who their favorite was. While I worked 2 jobs to pay for community college, Marcus got a full ride to Stanford, courtesy of Mom and Dad's checkbook. When I saved every penny for a down payment on a modest apartment, Marcus was gifted a luxury condo in downtown Seattle. The pattern was so obvious, yet every time I brought it up, I was labeled as jealous, bitter, or ungrateful. But the wedding situation was different. This was not just favoritism. This was deliberate sabotage. I had sent my save the dates 6 months ago. My parents had the date circled on their calendar. My venue was booked. My dress was altered, and my fiancé David and I had been planning this day down to the smallest detail. August 15th was our day, and everyone knew it. When Marcus called that evening, his voice carried that familiar tone of false concern that I had learned to recognize over the years. "Sarah, I hope there won't be any issues with the dates," he said, as if he had not just dropped a nuclear bomb on my life. "You know how hard it is to find good venues. Maybe you could consider moving yours. I mean, Miranda's family has already put down deposits, and her father's health is declining. We really cannot wait another year." The audacity was breathtaking. Miranda was his fiancée of exactly 4 months, a woman he had met at a networking event and proposed to after knowing her for 12 weeks. Meanwhile, David and I had been together for 5 years, engaged for 2, and planning this wedding meticulously. But somehow, in Marcus's world, their relationship took priority over everything else. I spent the next week in a fog of disbelief and rage. Every conversation with my parents followed the same script. "Marcus did not mean any harm, Seraphina. You know how important his career is right now. Miranda's family has connections that could really help him. Maybe you could be the bigger person here and just shift your date by a few weeks." The breaking point came when my mother suggested I should be grateful that Marcus was getting married at all, considering how picky he had always been. That was when something inside me snapped. I had spent years being the understanding sister, the one who sacrificed for the golden child, but this was too much. I started digging into Marcus's perfect life, and what I found made my blood run cold. My brother worked as a financial advisor at a prestigious firm downtown, managing portfolios for wealthy clients. He lived in that gifted condo, drove a Tesla, and wore designer suits that cost more than my monthly rent. On paper, everything looked legitimate. But when I started paying closer attention to his social media posts, his lifestyle, and the timeline of his sudden wealth increase, things did not add up. I remembered my grandmother's estate from 3 years ago. Grandma Rose had been the family matriarch, a woman who had built a small fortune through decades of careful investments in real estate deals. When she passed, Marcus had volunteered to handle the estate proceedings, claiming his financial expertise made him the obvious choice. The family had trusted him completely. After all, he was the golden child. He would never do anything to hurt the family. The official story was that Grandma Rose had left most of her estate to charity, with small amounts going to each family member. I had received $5,000, which seemed reasonable for a grandmother who had always been generous, but not wealthy by our standards. But now, looking back, I realized I had never seen any actual documentation. Marcus had simply presented us with typed summaries and told us the legal details were too complex for us to understand. That weekend, I drove to the county courthouse and requested copies of all public records related to Rose Garrett's estate. What I found there changed everything. My grandmother had not left most of her money to charity. She had left nearly $2 million split between her 4 grandchildren, Marcus, myself, and our 2 cousins, Jake and Emma. Each of us should have received approximately $475,000. My hands shook as I photocopied page after page of legal documents. The signature on the will looked authentic. I remembered Grandma Rose's distinctive handwriting from birthday cards and letters. But the bank statements and asset transfers told a different story. Somehow Marcus had managed to redirect the funds intended for the rest of us directly into his personal accounts. The charity donations that supposedly accounted for most of the estate never happened. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot, staring at the evidence of my brother's betrayal. This was not just about wedding dates anymore. Marcus had stolen nearly $1.5 million from his own family members. He had looked us in the eye, hugged us at the funeral, and consoled us about Grandma's modest bequests while he pocketed money that legally belonged to us. The Tesla, the condo, the designer lifestyle, it was all built on theft. And now he was using that stolen money to fund a lavish wedding designed to overshadow mine. The golden child had finally crossed a line that I could not ignore, and I was going to make sure he paid for every single dollar he had taken from our family. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the entire day at the courthouse, the county clerk's office, and the public library building my case against Marcus. What started as a suspicion about wedding sabotage had evolved into uncovering a systematic pattern of financial fraud that stretched back years. The estate documents were just the beginning. I discovered that Marcus had also been named as the trustee for our grandfather's small pension fund, which had been set aside for family medical emergencies. According to the paperwork, I found that fund had been exhausted helping with Grandma Rose's end-of-life medical care. But the hospital records told a different story. Medicare and Grandma's insurance had covered almost all her expenses. I created a timeline cross-referencing Marcus's sudden lifestyle upgrades with the dates when various family funds had disappeared. The Tesla was purchased 2 weeks after Grandpa's pension fund was exhausted. The designer watch he wore to every family gathering was bought the same month Grandma Rose's estate was settled. Even the engagement ring he had given Miranda, a stunning 3-carat diamond that must have cost $40,000, was purchased using money that should have been distributed among the grandchildren. But I needed more than just circumstantial evidence. I needed proof that would hold up in court, and more importantly, proof that would make my family finally see Marcus for what he really was. That evening, I called my cousin Emma, who lived across the country in Denver. "Emma, I need to ask you something about Grandma Rose's will," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Did you ever see the actual legal documents or just the summary Marcus gave us?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Just the summary," she said slowly. "Why, Sarah, you sound upset. What's going on?" I took a deep breath and told her everything I had discovered. Emma's shocked silence spoke volumes. When she finally found her words, her voice was shaking with rage. "That son of a bitch stole from his own family, Sarah. My portion of that inheritance was supposed to go toward my daughter's college fund. Do you know how many extra shifts I've worked because I thought Grandma only left us $5,000 each?" Within an hour, Emma had called our cousin Jake, and both of them were demanding copies of the same documents I had found. The family group chat, which had been silent since Marcus's wedding announcement, suddenly exploded with messages as my cousins shared their own suspicions about various family financial matters that Marcus had handled over the years. Jake reminded us about the time Marcus had offered to help our aunt sell her house when she was going through a divorce. He had found her a buyer and handled all the paperwork, claiming his real estate connections would get her the best deal. Aunt Sarah had walked away with barely enough to cover her legal fees, while Marcus had somehow earned a substantial commission that none of us had questioned at the time. The pattern was becoming clear. Marcus had spent years positioning himself as the family's financial expert, volunteering to handle complex transactions and legal matters. Everyone had trusted him because he was the golden child, the successful one, the one with the fancy degree and the important job. But he had been systematically stealing from his own relatives for years. I knew I had enough evidence to confront him directly, but I also knew that Marcus was a master manipulator. If I gave him time to prepare, he would find a way to explain everything away, or worse, destroy evidence before I could take legal action. I needed to catch him off guard in front of witnesses, when he could not spin his way out of the truth. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. My parents had planned a family dinner for the following Sunday to discuss the wedding situation and hopefully convince me to change my date. They had invited Marcus, Miranda, and me, hoping to facilitate some kind of compromise. It was perfect. I spent the week preparing my presentation. I printed out every bank statement, every legal document, and every piece of evidence I had gathered. I created a timeline showing exactly how Marcus had acquired each luxury item using stolen family money. I even prepared copies for everyone who would be attending the dinner. On Sunday afternoon, I arrived at my parents' house with my evidence neatly organized in a folder. Marcus and Miranda were already there, sitting on the living room couch like the perfect couple. Marcus was wearing another expensive shirt, and Miranda's engagement ring caught the light as she gestured while talking. Everything they had was built on money stolen from our own family. "I'm so glad we can all sit down and work this out like adults," my mother said as we gathered around the dining table. "I'm sure we can find a solution that makes everyone happy." My father nodded in agreement. Marcus has explained how important this date is for Miranda's family, and I think if we all just communicate openly, we can figure out a way for both weddings to happen without any conflict. Marcus smiled, that charming smile that had gotten him out of trouble his entire life. "I really appreciate you being willing to discuss this, Sarah. I know how much your wedding means to you, and I would never want to cause any problems. Maybe we could even have a double ceremony. Wouldn't that be amazing? Two siblings getting married on the same day." The suggestion was so absurd, so tone-deaf, that I almost laughed. Instead, I opened my folder and spread the first set of documents across the table. "Before we talk about weddings," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I think we need to discuss how you've been stealing money from our family for the past 3 years." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's face went pale, and Miranda looked confused, glancing between the documents and her fiancé. My parents stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. "Sarah, what are you talking about?" my mother said, her voice barely above a whisper. I picked up the copy of Grandma Rose's will and placed it directly in front of Marcus. "I'm talking about the $475,000 that Marcus stole from me, and the $475,000 he stole from Emma, and the $475,000 he stole from Jake. I'm talking about Grandpa's pension fund and Aunt Sarah's house sale, and who knows how many other family financial matters that our golden boy has been handling." Marcus tried to speak, but I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "I'm talking about how every luxury item you own, every expensive dinner you've posted on social media, every designer piece of clothing you wear was purchased with money you stole from your own family, including that engagement ring on Miranda's finger." I turned to Miranda, whose face had gone completely white. "Did he tell you he could afford a $40,000 ring on a financial advisor's salary? Did he mention that his condo was a gift from our parents, or did he let you believe he had earned enough to buy luxury real estate on his own?" The room erupted in chaos. My parents demanded explanations. Marcus stammered denials, and Miranda stared at her engagement ring as if it had suddenly caught fire. But I was not finished. I had spent years being silenced by this family's need to protect their golden child, and I was going to make sure every truth came out. "The wedding date was never about venue availability or Miranda's father's health," I said, looking directly at Marcus. "It was about overshadowing my day because you could not stand the thought of me having something that wasn't about you. But here's what you did not count on. I'm not the same pushover sister you've been walking over your entire life. And by the time I'm done, everyone is going to know exactly what kind of person you really are. The explosion at that family dinner was unlike anything our household had ever experienced. Marcus had stormed out, dragging a sobbing Miranda behind him, while my parents sat in stunned silence, staring at the mountain of evidence spread across their dining room table. My mother kept picking up documents and setting them down again, as if she could make the truth disappear by handling the papers differently. "Seraphina, there has to be some mistake," she whispered for the 10th time. "Marcus would never. He's not capable of something like this." But my father, who had always been the quieter parent, was examining the bank statements with the attention to detail that came from his background in accounting. After 20 minutes of silence, he looked up at me with eyes I had never seen before, a mixture of devastation and dawning understanding. "These numbers are real," he said quietly. "The dates match up. The amounts." He trailed off, shaking his head. How did we not see this? That evening, I drove home feeling both vindicated and exhausted. Exposing Marcus felt like finally breathing after holding my breath for years, but I knew this was just the beginning. My brother was not going to go down without a fight, and he had spent his entire life perfecting the art of manipulation. Sure enough, by Tuesday morning, my phone was buzzing with messages from relatives I had not heard from in months. Marcus had gone into full damage control mode, reaching out to every family member with his version of events. According to his story, I was a jealous, unstable sister who had fabricated documents to sabotage his wedding. He claimed I had never gotten over being the less successful sibling and was now trying to destroy his life out of spite. Some relatives bought his story completely. My Aunt Patricia, who had always favored Marcus, called me screaming about how I was tearing the family apart with my lies and jealousy, but others were starting to ask questions they should have asked years ago. Emma flew in from Denver that Wednesday, bringing with her a lawyer friend named Rebecca, who specialized in estate fraud. Rebecca reviewed my evidence and confirmed what I already knew. Marcus had committed multiple felonies, and we had enough proof to pursue both criminal charges and civil action to recover the stolen funds. The challenge, Rebecca explained as we sat in my apartment, is that Marcus has probably spent a significant portion of the money. The condo, the car, the lifestyle expenses. We might be able to recover some assets, but the cash portion is likely gone. Jake arrived from Portland the next day, and the three of us spent hours going through family financial history, identifying every transaction Marcus had been involved in over the past 5 years. The scope of his theft was staggering. Beyond the inheritance, money, we discovered that he had also taken funds from our great-aunt's estate money that had been designated for the family reunion fund, and even the proceeds from the sale of our grandparents' vacation cabin. But the most damaging discovery came when Emma found an old email thread on our grandmother's iPad, which had been passed down to our aunt after Grandma Rose died. In these emails, our grandmother had clearly outlined her wishes for her estate. Not just the distribution of funds, but specific instructions about family heirlooms, personal items, and even a college fund she wanted established for the great-grandchildren. None of those instructions had been followed. The family photos that were supposed to go to me had disappeared. The antique jewelry meant for Emma was nowhere to be found. Even Grandma Rose's recipe collection, which she had specifically wanted, preserved and shared among all the women in the family, had vanished. Marcus had not just stolen money. He had erased our grandmother's final wishes and stolen pieces of our family history. By Friday, our coalition had grown. Jake's wife, Sarah, who worked as a forensic accountant, had volunteered to help trace the missing funds. Emma's lawyer friend, Rebecca, was preparing to file formal charges. Even my cousin Tyler, who lived locally and had always been neutral in family conflicts, was asking pointed questions about his own missing inheritance from a great-uncle whose estate Marcus had helped settle. But the breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Miranda called me directly, her voice shaking with tears and rage. "Sarah, I need to talk to you. Can we meet somewhere private?" We met at a coffee shop near her office, and what she told me changed everything. Miranda had spent the week going through Marcus's financial records trying to understand the accusations I had made. What she found was even worse than what I had discovered. "He has been lying to me about everything," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "His salary, his assets, even his debt. Sarah, he owes over $200,000 in credit card debt. The condo isn't paid off. He's behind on the mortgage payments. And that engagement ring, he financed it at 30% interest." Miranda had also found evidence of Marcus's gambling addiction, something our family had never known about. He had been losing significant amounts of money at the casino every month, trying to recoup his losses with increasingly desperate bets. The stolen inheritance money had not just funded his lifestyle, it had been feeding an addiction that was spiraling out of control. "There's more," Miranda said, her voice barely audible. "I found emails between him and someone named Tony. Marcus has been promising him money, large amounts. And the tone of these emails. Sarah, I think he's gotten involved with people who are dangerous. Loan sharks, maybe?" The last email was a threat about what would happen if Marcus did not pay up by the end of this month. This revelation changed everything. Marcus was not just a family thief. He was a desperate man who had stolen from his relatives to fund an addiction and was now in debt to criminals. The wedding date conflict suddenly made perfect sense. He was planning to use the wedding as cover for a major financial scheme, possibly involving Miranda's family's money or connections. That evening, our family coalition held an emergency meeting at my apartment. Rebecca, our lawyer, was clear about the implications of Miranda's discoveries. "If Marcus is involved with loan sharks or other criminal enterprises, then your family could be in physical danger. These people don't care about legal proceedings or family dynamics. They want their money and they'll go after anyone they think has access to it." We made the decision to accelerate our timeline. Instead of waiting for the perfect moment to expose Marcus publicly, we would file formal charges immediately and alert the authorities about the potential criminal connections. Emma, Jake, and I would seek restraining orders, and Rebecca would coordinate with law enforcement to ensure our safety. But even as we planned our legal strategy, I could not shake the feeling that Marcus was planning something bigger. The wedding date was still 6 weeks away, and I knew my brother well enough to know that he would not go down without trying to take everyone else with him. The golden child had spent his life getting out of consequences through charm and manipulation, but this time the stakes were too high and the evidence too solid for him to simply talk his way out. As I looked around my apartment at my cousins, my new lawyer, and even my former future sister-in-law, I realized something important had happened. For the first time in my life, I was not facing Marcus alone. I had built a coalition of truth, and together we were strong enough to bring down the golden child's empire of lies. But Marcus still had one card left to play, and when he played it, it would test every alliance I had built and threaten to destroy not just my case against him, but everything I had worked to rebuild in my life. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning exactly 4 weeks before what was supposed to be my wedding day. I woke up to 17 missed calls from Emma and a text message that made my blood run cold. "Marcus knows everything. Rebecca sold us out. Call me now." I called Emma back with shaking hands, and what she told me shattered everything I thought I knew about loyalty and trust. Rebecca, the lawyer who had been helping us build our case against Marcus, had been feeding him information from the very beginning. Every document we had shared with her, every strategy we had discussed, every piece of evidence we had gathered, Marcus had known about all of it. "How did you find out?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Jake saw them together at a restaurant downtown last night," Emma said, her words coming out in a rush. "He thought it was strange, so he took pictures. They looked way too comfortable for a lawyer meeting with the subject of her investigation." This morning, Jake confronted Rebecca directly, and she admitted everything. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Marcus had ever done to me. I had trusted Rebecca completely. She had sat in my apartment, looked me in the eye, and promised to help me get justice for my family, all while she was secretly working for my brother, feeding him our every move. Within an hour, Jake, Emma, and I were meeting at a diner across town, trying to figure out how much damage had been done. The answer was devastating. Rebecca had not just been sharing information, she had been actively sabotaging our case from the inside. "Remember when we couldn't find those bank records from the estate settlement?" Jake said, his face grim. "Rebecca said they must have been destroyed in routine file purging. But now I'm wondering if she made sure they disappeared." Emma pulled out her phone and showed us a series of screenshots. "I've been going through all our communications with her, and look at this." Every time we were close to finding something important, Rebecca would steer us in a different direction. When I wanted to subpoena Marcus's employer, she said it was premature. When you wanted to freeze his assets, she said we needed more evidence first. The scope of Rebecca's deception was staggering. She had convinced us to delay filing criminal charges, claiming we needed a stronger case. She had advised us against going to the media, saying it would hurt our legal position. She had even talked us out of warning other family members about Marcus's theft, arguing that it could be seen as witness tampering. But the worst revelation came when Jake showed us the photos he had taken at the restaurant. Rebecca and Marcus were not just talking, they were holding hands across the table. The lawyer who had been pretending to help us seek justice was actually in a romantic relationship with the man who had stolen from our family. "How long do you think this has been going on?" I asked, staring at the photos in disbelief. "I did some digging this morning," Emma said. "Rebecca and Marcus have been dating for at least 6 months. She was never Emma's lawyer friend. That was all a lie. Marcus must have sent her to infiltrate our group from the beginning." The implications were terrifying. Marcus had known about our investigation from day one. He had known about every piece of evidence we had found, every strategy we had planned, every move we were going to make. While we thought we were building a case against him, he had been 10 steps ahead, using his inside information to stay 1 step ahead of consequences. But Marcus's manipulation ran even deeper than we had realized. That afternoon, I received a call from Miranda, and her voice was completely different from our previous conversation. Gone was the angry, betrayed woman who had brought me evidence of Marcus's crimes. Instead, she sounded cold and distant. "Sarah, I need to tell you something," she said. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation last week, and I realize I made a mistake. I was upset and emotional, and I shared things that weren't accurate. Marcus has shown me the real financial documents, and everything is legitimate. I think you've misunderstood some things." My heart sank as I realized what was happening. Marcus had gotten to Miranda just like he had gotten to Rebecca. Whatever he had told her, whatever promises or threats he had made, it had been enough to flip her back to his side. "Miranda, you showed me bank statements," I said. "You brought me physical evidence of his gambling debts and his lies. You can't just pretend that didn't happen." "I was confused," she replied, her voice sounding rehearsed. "Those documents were taken out of context. Marcus explained everything to me. He's going to help me understand finances better, so I don't make mistakes like this again." The conversation ended with Miranda hanging up on me, and I knew that another ally had been lost. Marcus had somehow convinced her that black was white and up was down, just like he had done with Rebecca. That evening, our coalition meeting felt more like a funeral than a strategy session. In one day, we had lost our legal representation and one of our key witnesses. Worse, we realized that Marcus probably had copies of all our evidence and knew exactly what we were planning to do next. "We need to assume that everything we've shared with Rebecca is compromised," Jake said. "All our legal strategies, all our evidence, everything. Marcus knows it all." Emma was pacing around my living room, her anger barely contained. "How could we have been so stupid? How did we not see that she was playing us from the beginning?" But as devastating as the betrayal was, it also revealed something important about Marcus's character. The fact that he had gone to such elaborate lengths to sabotage our investigation proved that our evidence was solid. If our case against him was weak, he would not have needed to plant a spy in our group. "He's scared," I said, the realization dawning on me. "Marcus is terrified of what we've found, and he's desperate to stop us. People don't go to these lengths unless they know they're guilty, and they know they're going to lose." Jake nodded slowly. But the question is, what do we do now? We can't trust any lawyers Rebecca might recommend. We don't have anyone on the inside anymore, and Marcus knows every move we're planning to make. The answer came to me suddenly, and it was so simple I almost laughed. We stop planning, I said. We stop having meetings and strategy sessions and careful legal preparations. We just act. Emma and Jake looked at me skeptically, but I continued. Marcus has been winning because he's always known what we were going to do before we did it. But what if we stopped telling anyone our plans? What if we just took action without giving him time to countermove? It was risky, and it meant abandoning the careful, methodical approach that Rebecca had convinced us to take. But it also meant that Marcus would finally be caught off guard, facing consequences he could not manipulate his way out of. As my cousins left that night, I felt something I had not experienced in weeks: hope. Marcus might have thought he had won by turning Rebecca and Miranda against us, but his betrayal had actually taught me something valuable. I did not need a perfect legal strategy or a team of allies to seek justice. Sometimes the best revenge was the kind that came without warning, swift and decisive, and impossible to charm your way out of. Marcus had spent his entire life being 3 steps ahead of everyone else, but that was about to change. The golden child was about to learn that sometimes the best plans are the ones nobody sees coming. The breakthrough came from the last person I expected, my own father. 3 days after discovering Rebecca's betrayal, I found him sitting on my apartment steps when I came home from work, holding a manila envelope that would change everything. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, his voice heavy with a mixture of shame and determination that I had never heard before. "I've been doing some digging of my own, and what I found—" He paused, shaking his head. "I'm so sorry I didn't believe you sooner." Inside my apartment, my father spread out documents that made my previous evidence look incomplete. As an accountant, he had access to financial databases and professional resources that I could never have reached. What he had discovered over the past 72 hours was a complete map of Marcus's criminal enterprise. "I started with his tax returns," my father explained. As his father, I co-signed on some of his early loans, so I still had access to certain financial information. "Sarah, your brother has been committing tax fraud for 3 years. He never reported any of the inheritance money as income, which means he owes the IRS over $200,000 in back taxes and penalties." But that was just the beginning. My father had also contacted his professional network, quietly asking questions about Marcus's employer and his role there. What he learned was devastating. "Marcus was fired 6 months ago," my father said, his voice barely audible. "He's been lying to everyone, including Miranda, about still having his job. He was caught embezzling client funds, small amounts at first, but it escalated quickly. The firm chose not to prosecute because they didn't want the publicity, but they made it clear he would never work in finance again." The timeline was becoming clear. Marcus had been stealing from his employer while simultaneously stealing from our family. When he lost his job, the gambling debts and lifestyle expenses had become unsustainable, which explained why he was now borrowing from dangerous people. "There's more," my father continued, pulling out another set of documents. "I contacted the private investigator that your grandmother used when she was having problems with her financial advisor years ago. He still had files on our family's financial history, including detailed records of exactly what Grandma Rose intended to leave to each grandchild. The private investigator's files included not just the original will, but also recordings of conversations where our grandmother had explicitly discussed her intentions. She had wanted to split her estate equally among her 4 grandchildren, with specific provisions for education funds and family heirlooms. Marcus had violated every single one of her wishes. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. My father had also discovered that Marcus had been using his position as estate administrator to take out loans against family properties that he did not own. "He used your inheritance as collateral for his gambling debts," my father said, his voice breaking. "Sarah, if those loan sharks decide to collect, they could legally seize assets that should belong to you, Emma, and Jake. Your brother has put the entire family at financial risk. As overwhelming as this information was, it also represented something I had never expected: my father taking my side against Marcus. For the first time in my life, my dad was not making excuses for his golden child or asking me to be the understanding sister. "Why now?" I asked. "Why are you helping me now after years of protecting him?" My father was quiet for a long moment. "Because I realized that protecting Marcus was the same thing as abandoning you," he said. "And because your mother and I raised a criminal, and we need to take responsibility for that." That evening, my father did something that shocked me even more than his evidence gathering. He called Emma and Jake, directly apologizing for years of favoritism and asking how he could help make things right. Then he called my mother and told her in no uncertain terms that the family was going to support my quest for justice with or without her cooperation. The next morning brought another unexpected ally. Sarah, Jake's wife, and the forensic accountant who had been helping trace Marcus's financial crimes called with news that changed our entire strategy. "Sarah, I think I know how to get all your money back," she said, excitement clear in her voice. "I've been analyzing Marcus's spending patterns, and he's made a crucial mistake. Most of the stolen inheritance money is sitting in investment accounts that he opened using falsified documents. If we can prove those accounts were funded with stolen money, we can freeze them immediately." Sarah had discovered that Marcus had been trying to hide his theft by converting the cash into investments, thinking that would make the money harder to trace. But his inexperience with money laundering had led him to make amateur mistakes that left clear paper trails. He used the same bank routing numbers, the same identification documents, and even some of the same investment strategies your grandmother had used, Sarah explained. "It's like he created a roadmap of his own crimes." Within hours, we had enough evidence to not only prove Marcus's guilt, but to recover most of the stolen funds. Sarah's forensic analysis, combined with my father's access to professional financial databases, had created an airtight case that even the most expensive lawyer could not defend against. But the final piece of evidence came from Marcus himself. That afternoon, my father received a panicked phone call from his golden child, who was clearly unaware that his father had joined our coalition. "Dad, I need your help," Marcus said, his voice desperate. "Some people are threatening me, and I need money to make them go away. Can you lend me $50,000? I'll pay you back after the wedding, I promise." My father, following a script we had prepared, told Marcus he would need to see financial documentation before lending such a large amount. Marcus, desperate and not thinking clearly, emailed his father detailed bank statements showing exactly how he had moved money between accounts, where he had hidden various assets, and even communications with the loan sharks who were threatening him. "He just confessed to everything in writing," my father said after ending the call. "He sent me a complete record of his crimes because he thought I would help him escape the consequences." That evening, our new coalition gathered in my apartment to plan our final move. We had evidence of tax fraud, estate theft, investment fraud, and loan sharking connections. We had recordings, bank statements, falsified documents, and Marcus's own written confession. Most importantly, we had the legal standing to freeze his accounts and recover the stolen funds immediately. "The question now," Sarah said, "is how we want to handle this. We can go to the authorities quietly and let them arrest him, or we can confront him publicly and give him a chance to confess and make restitution." My father surprised me by speaking up first. "He needs to face consequences for what he's done," he said. "But I also think our family deserves to hear the truth directly from him. These secrets have poisoned our relationships for too long." Emma and Jake agreed. After years of Marcus manipulating family dynamics and playing favorites, they wanted the entire family to understand exactly who the golden child really was. I looked around the room at my new allies: my father, who had finally chosen justice over favoritism; Sarah, who had used her professional skills to uncover the full scope of Marcus's crimes; and my cousins, who had never wavered in their support despite the betrayals and setbacks we had faced. "Then we give him one final family dinner," I said. "We invite everyone, mom, the aunts and uncles, anyone who has been affected by his lies. We present the evidence, we demand full restitution, and we let him choose between making things right or facing criminal prosecution. It was risky giving Marcus advance warning and a chance to prepare his defenses, but it was also the right thing to do. Our family had been torn apart by secrets and lies for too long. If we were going to rebuild trust and relationships, it needed to start with complete honesty about what had happened and who was responsible. Marcus had spent his entire life charming his way out of consequences, but charm would not save him from the mountain of evidence we had assembled. The golden child was about to face the one thing he had never experienced before, a family that refused to enable his behavior and demanded accountability for his actions. The final confrontation happened on a Sunday afternoon in my parents' living room exactly 1 week before what should have been Marcus's wedding day. The entire extended family was there. My parents, Emma and Jake, their spouses, my aunts and uncles, and even some cousins who had driven in from out of state. Everyone except Marcus and Miranda, who still believed they were coming to discuss wedding logistics. When Marcus walked through the door, his confident smile faltered immediately. The room was too quiet, too tense, and there were too many serious faces staring at him. But it was the sight of my father sitting beside me with boxes of evidence arranged on the coffee table that made all the color drain from his face. "What's going on here?" Marcus asked, his voice already defensive. "Where's Miranda? Miranda will be here shortly." My mother said, her voice steady but strained. "But first, your family needs to hear some things from you." I stood up and faced my brother directly. "Marcus, for the past month, we've been investigating your handling of various family financial matters. What we found goes far beyond wedding date conflicts or sibling rivalry. What we found is a pattern of theft, fraud, and betrayal that has been going on for years." "Sarah, not this again," Marcus said, trying to summon his usual charm. "I thought we had resolved these misunderstandings. You're embarrassing yourself in front of the whole family." But this time I had backup. My father stood up beside me and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Son, these aren't misunderstandings. I've spent the past week verifying every single allegation, and I owe this family an apology for not investigating sooner." What happened next was the systematic destruction of Marcus's carefully constructed lies. One by one, we presented evidence of his crimes. Emma showed the family the real inheritance documents, proving how much money each grandchild should have received. Jake displayed the timeline of Marcus's luxury purchases, showing how they coincided with the theft of family funds. Sarah, our forensic accountant, walked everyone through the investment accounts, where Marcus had hidden the stolen money. My father presented the tax documents, proving that Marcus had been evading federal taxes on the stolen inheritance. And finally, we played the audio recording of Marcus's confession call, where he had detailed his financial crimes while asking for help to pay off loan sharks. The room was dead silent, except for the sound of Marcus's world collapsing around him. Several family members were crying. My Uncle Frank, who had always been Marcus's biggest supporter after our parents looked like he had been physically struck. "Marcus," my Aunt Sarah said, her voice shaking, "you told me that Grandma Rose only left me $1,000 because she was disappointed in my divorce. I've been carrying that guilt for 3 years. You made me believe my own mother died thinking I was a failure." The personal revelations were even more devastating than the financial crimes. Marcus had not just stolen money, he had weaponized our grandmother's death to manipulate family emotions. He had told different relatives different lies about what Grandma Rose had supposedly said about them, creating guilt and resentment that had damaged relationships for years. But Marcus still had one final card to play. "You think you're so righteous," he said, his voice turning vicious as his charm finally cracked completely. "But you're all just jealous that I made something of myself while the rest of you stayed mediocre. I earned that money by being smarter and more successful than any of you." The mask was completely off now. This was the real Marcus, not the charming golden child, but a narcissist who truly believed he deserved to steal from his own family because he considered himself superior to them. "You earned it." Emma stood up, her voice rising. "You earned money by forging legal documents and stealing from your own grandparents' estate. You earned money by lying to elderly relatives about their inheritance. Marcus, You're not successful. You're a criminal. That's when Miranda walked into the room, and her timing could not have been more perfect. She arrived just as Marcus was screaming at our cousin about how he deserved better than this pathetic family anyway. She heard him call our grandmother a stupid old woman who was too senile to handle her own money. Miranda stood in the doorway, still wearing her engagement ring, listening to her fiancé reveal his true character to a room full of devastated relatives. When Marcus finally noticed her, his whole demeanor changed instantly. Miranda, thank God you're here. These people have lost their minds. They're trying to sabotage our wedding with these ridiculous accusations. But Miranda had heard enough. She slowly walked across the room and placed her engagement ring on the coffee table next to all the evidence of Marcus's crimes. 3 weeks ago, you told me that ring was a symbol of our future together, she said quietly. Now I know it's a symbol of the money you stole from your own family. Marcus, you're not the man I thought I was going to marry. You're not even close. With Miranda's final rejection, Marcus's composure completely shattered. He began making threats, claiming he would sue everyone in the room for slander. He screamed about how ungrateful his family was, how he had always been the only successful one, how we were all just trying to drag him down to our level. But his threats were empty, and everyone in the room knew it. We had enough evidence to send him to prison, and he knew it too. The golden child who had spent his life avoiding consequences was finally facing accountability, and he had no idea how to handle it. My father, who had been silent during most of the confrontation, finally spoke up. Marcus, you have two choices. You can work with us to return the money you've stolen and seek professional help for your gambling addiction, or we can turn all of this evidence over to the police and let the justice system handle it. We've already had the investment accounts frozen, Sarah added. Most of the inheritance money is recoverable, but the criminal charges and the tax evasion, those consequences depend on what you choose to do next. Marcus looked around the room at faces that had once adored him, now filled with disappointment, anger, and disgust. The golden child was finally seeing himself reflected in other people's eyes, without the filter of favoritism, and enabling that had protected him his entire life. I need time to think, he said finally, his voice barely audible. You have 24 hours, my father replied. After that, we're filing charges. Marcus left that day and never came back to our house. Within a week, his lawyer contacted us with a plea agreement. Marcus would return all recoverable assets, pay restitution for money that had been spent, and enter a treatment program for gambling addiction. In exchange, the family would not pursue criminal charges as long as he stayed current on his repayment plan. The wedding was canceled, obviously. Marcus moved across the country and took a low-level accounting job to begin paying back his debts. Miranda, meanwhile, became an unexpected part of our family circle. She had been as much a victim of Marcus's lies as any of us, and she brought a legal expertise that helped us navigate the restitution process. 6 months later, I had my wedding. A small, intimate ceremony with the family members who had stood by me when it mattered. My father walked me down the aisle, and for the first time in my life, I felt like his daughter, rather than the consolation prize for not having a better golden child. Emma used her recovered inheritance to start the college fund for her daughter that she had always planned. Jake invested his money in expanding his small business. And our family, while scarred by the experience, became closer than we had ever been before. The most surprising change was in my relationship with my parents. My mother struggled for months to accept that her favorite child was a criminal, but eventually she began attending therapy to address her role in enabling Marcus's behavior. My father became the ally I had always wished for, and we developed a relationship based on mutual respect rather than his guilt over favoring Marcus. As for Marcus himself, I heard through family channels that he was slowly paying back his debts and attending gambling addiction meetings. I never spoke to him directly again, and I was at peace with that decision. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive, and some relationships are too toxic to rebuild. Looking back on that terrible year, I realized that Marcus's attempt to sabotage my wedding had actually saved my life. If he had not been so greedy, so desperate to overshadow me one more time, I might never have investigated his finances. Our family might have continued enabling his criminal behavior for years, and more people would have been hurt. The golden child had finally faced consequences, and our family had learned the difference between love and enablement. It was a painful lesson, but it was also a necessary one. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was stealing from you or your family? How did you handle the betrayal? And do you believe that family members should face the same consequences as strangers when they commit crimes against their own relatives? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences help other viewers who might be facing similar situations. If this story of family justice resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it. Subscribe for more real-life stories about standing up to toxic family members and choosing your own worth over keeping the peace. And share this video with anyone who needs to hear that they don't have to accept being treated poorly just because someone is related to them. Thank you for taking this journey with me and for supporting content that shows how truth and persistence can overcome years of manipulation and favoritism. Remember, you deserve to be treated with respect by everyone in your life, especially your family. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone's destructive behavior, even when that someone is the golden child.